Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Thanks, guys. That was fun. Can you guys hear him? Can you hear me okay? Do I need to move my mic? We're good? We good?
Put it closer.
I've heard somebody say before, everyone deserves at least one standing ovation in their life, so appreciate you giving that for me.
We're happy to facilitate. All right, so let's just get a little context. So tell us about your upbringing, maybe your childhood, and maybe a little bit about when your first entrepreneurial experience, whatever it is, whether it was selling pods, whatever knick-knack it was.
Sure. So I grew up here in Utah. I grew up in West Valley. And when I was in, I guess it would have been junior high, my brother was taking a shop class, and they had this little programming bit, and I ended up doing his homework for him, basically, because he needed to do a programming project, and I really thought it was cool, and I got a book from the library on BASIC, not even QBasic, just BASIC, so I had my little numbers, from line numbers and everything, and writing a bunch of go-to code, and it was a blast. I kept going from there, and I ended up discovering QBasic, and it was the most amazing thing in the world because all of a sudden I didn't have to have these line numbers, and then from there I thought, I could make a game. I could make a video game in this, and so I wrote a little RPG. I actually maxed out. So in QBasic you only have, I think it's 65,000 lines of code. And I maxed that out, which was when I discovered subroutines, which is a really important discovery as a programmer. And so here I had a bunch of code, which was good. But I built this little RPG, and I tried to sell it online, and it took up like 3 floppy disks because I had to have a bunch of binaries to go with it for selling. But I posted it on the internet, and nobody bought it. So I guess that was my first failed attempt. After that, I got into the internet, and I had my own Angel Fire web homepage and everything, and I saw these things happening, and I saw that everybody kept putting counters on their homepages. Do you remember that? You put a little counter, like 500 people have been to the site. And I thought, that's kind of gimmicky, but then as I would look at other people's pages, a really popular thing for younger people to do was to have little virtual pets on their website. So they'd like copy some picture of like a monkey or a gerbil or something. It's like, this is Tammy, my little hamster, and they'd put it on their homepage. And I thought, what if you put those two things together? And so I made a website called Dragon Isle, which was a place where you could essentially have a website counter that was your pet. So once you hit a certain number of page views on your site, then the picture would change. So it'd be an egg until you got to 10 visitors, and then that would hatch into this little tiny baby dinosaur, baby dragon, until you got to 100. And so that was the next project that I did, and that grew really good. But I never figured out how to make any money off of it. I made a virtual pet, just a Windows game that was about dragons to go with it, and ended up selling 3 or 4 copies of it. But it was fun. I just did it all because it was fun. So I've always kind of dabbled in selling software and just in trying to do fun things with software, but those are some of the early experiences I had.
Okay, cool. And then, so obviously this led into, you went to college, right? And you majored in computer science?
Yep.
So you did your bachelor's in computer science, and then you did a master's as well. What was that in?
Yeah, so my master's was computer science with an emphasis on usability.
Okay.
So all my research was HCI, human-computer interaction, which is how to get humans and computers to talk to each other without the humans ripping their hair out. So it was really fun, really applicable to a lot of what we've done since then.
Okay. So it was during this program, right, when you were in a software class, right? And you had to develop a business idea or a business plan and kind of present that to your teacher?
Yeah.
And is this when Instructure was the birth of Instructure?
Yeah, so a friend of mine, Devlin Daly, and me, we were taking the class together. We'd done some usability classes before, and we took this class together, which was Intro to Venture Startups. And so the premise of the class was pretend you're doing a tech startup, do all your market research, put together your pitch, put together your financial model. I've been like neglecting this half of the audience. It's not that I like you guys. Just point it this way. So that was the premise of the class, was just pretend like you're doing a startup. And so as we looked at what we wanted to do, we came up with some terrible idea around library software that was really bad, and we brought it to class, and everybody just poo-pooed all over it. We went back, and Devlin remembered some advice from Paul Graham, which was, if you are thinking about doing a software startup, think of the most broken piece of software you know of, and there's probably an opportunity there. So we looked at each other for about half a second and said, Blackboard. We were students at BYU. The Blackboard was a system that they used for tracking grades and turning in homework and communicating with your teacher, and it was just terrible. We hated it, and we were miserable every time we had to use it as students and as TAs. We'd seen both sides of it, both the learning and the teaching side. And so we said, there's got to be something better out there. And we looked at the space, and there was nothing better out there. And we said, this has the potential to be something really interesting. We wanted to be the Google Docs of learning management systems, which is what the sector is called. And so we decided to run with it, and it's been a blast ever since.
So obviously, spoiler alert, it's been a success. But before then, so it's just you and Devlin, you both have this shared experience, this negative experience with Blackboard. How did you validate that other people felt the same way? Did you talk to professors, or you just went for it right then?
So this is the piece that if I was I don't pretend to be wise or know a whole lot. If I was going to try to impart some kind of wisdom to people who are trying to start companies, it would be one of the characteristics that a founder should have that maybe doesn't get recognized very much because is humility, honestly. Because you need a lot of pride and you need a lot of enthusiasm and exuberance, but you also need to be able to take feedback and internalize it. And do something about it. And so as we had this idea and said, we can do better than Blackboard did, I guarantee that there were computer science students at least 20 other universities in the country who had the same opinion. And there were at least 3 other groups at BYU who had the same opinion that we did. And said, we can totally build something in a weekend and do better than this. And so it wasn't that spark that made the difference. What made the difference, in my opinion, is that we took what we thought were valuable ideas. We bundled them up in a PowerPoint deck. It was about 250 slides of things that we thought a learning management system should do, and what they could do differently. And then we started calling up schools. And we would talk to the people who knew the space. So in LMS space, that's instructional designers. That's people who create learning materials. So we would talk to the head of instructional design. We'd talk to the CTO, the CIO, anybody we could get as high up as we could get. And this was at universities like UC Irvine, Berkeley, and UNLV. And we just sat down with them. We showed them our ideas, and we said, this is what we think we could do. This is what we think would be awesome. What do you think? What are your pain points? A lot of the presentation that we did, it wasn't, a lot of the time actually wasn't in the mock-ups. It was in us asking questions. We'd show a bunch of pain points and say, this is things that we think people hurt with when they're in the LMS. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And they'd say, we really hate discussion boards. And we'd say, okay, well, what is it that you hate about discussion boards? And we kept trying to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And the feedback that we would get, sometimes it was very different from what we expected. Sometimes it was exactly what we expected. But the reason I brought up that humility piece at the beginning is because you need to be able to read between the lines and recognize what people are saying without them actually saying it. Because when you go to present to somebody like that, they want you to feel good. They want you to come away with, they like me and we're friends and they think it's a good idea. But you have to be able to be receptive enough to recognize the pieces that actually do need to change. So it was by talking to 17 different universities that we gained the expertise that we needed to do something different and really take over the space. And that's why Instructure has been so successful.
Okay.
In my opinion.
So was this while you were still in the software development class, working on this class project, or?
No, that was after. So we graduated. Right before we graduated, we said, are we going to do this? Or I had job offers. I was going to go work for another startup here in Utah Valley. And we said, are we doing this for real or not? And we decided we were going to do it. So I turned down the job offer, called up the student loan office and said, give me as much money as you can because we're going to need it. And then we just ran with it. So it was after we graduated. Well, Devlin hadn't graduated. He kind of stalled for a little bit and finished it later. But after we were done with school, we did this full time.
Okay. So let's go. We'll return to that tour. But I'm curious, how did you get these meetings? How did you pitch yourselves? Did you say we're students just talking about learning management, or did you say you had a business? What was your approach?
So what we would say, we'd call them and we'd say, we are Instructure. We're a new company, a new startup in the LMS space. We want to build the next generation of learning management system, and we want your help in building it. Is there a time that we can get together? So we said very much we are a company. We're going to try to make money off this thing. But then we said we want you to help us build it. So it was not like, oh, we have this idea, we just want to run it by you and see what you think. It was, we're going to have a session, right? And we're going to skull together and try to figure out what the awesomeness is. And we would call up the highest level person we could find, and they hardly ever blew us off, actually. They would usually say, okay, and schedule something. And we ended up doing 3 big tours around through California and Nevada to get everybody that we wanted to talk to. But it was a lot of cold calling, honestly, because we didn't have the network to do it other than that.
So you just search for their name on the website?
Yeah, we browse a bunch of websites.
That's awesome. That takes some guts.
Yeah, it was fun.
Cool. So you talked about how when you went on this validation tour, you used a PowerPoint presentation. So obviously, you both felt validated in your idea. What stopped you from building a product then? Like you said, there was other CS students who said, we can build this in a weekend. Why didn't you build it in a weekend and then go on the tour? Why did you go with PowerPoint?
So I actually started building it in App Engine, as a little Python app. And we met with the school, and afterwards we're like, oh, we need to tweak some things. And we realized that we couldn't tweak some things because it was code, and it was so hard to modify. Whereas with the PowerPoint deck, it was just so easy to go in and change something. And we wanted we call it the product validation tour, the PVT. We wanted the PVT to be an iterative process, and so it needed to be something that's flexible enough. And there's high fidelity prototyping systems out there now that are probably just as easy to tweak as PowerPoint. I still like PowerPoint just because I know it so well, but I think that there's a lot of ways that you can get at that same solution.
Okay, so this tour, where did that idea come from? Did somebody push you in that direction, or you just felt the need to do it?
Yeah, I mean, we plan on talking to some people, but I guess the scope of it, being able to saying, you should go talk to a ton of people, that came out of the class that we took. So Josh Coates, who's now the CEO of the company, he taught that Intro to Venture Startups class. And as part of the class, that was one of the points that he made is, you need to assume that you don't know anything, right? And if you're going to sell this to people, you need to get in the heads of the people that are going to be buying it. And the only way to do that is to go talk to them. And it's not going and talking to 3 of them, and it's not going and talking to your buddies who happen to have some kind of connection to that market. It's going and talking to people who have no relationship with you, who have no skin in the game and aren't going to feel bad when they give you cold water, and talking to enough of them that you get some kind of confidence. And for us, that ended up being 17. For some projects, it could be more than that, quite honestly. It could be 30 or 40 before you get to that point. I would never go below 10 in any kind of project, just because I don't think that you can get enough confidence. The reason we stopped at 17 was because we felt like we had converged on a solution. We had 5-ish presentations at different sizes of schools, and the last 5 that we'd done, there wasn't anything we were tweaking anymore. There wasn't any additional feedback we were getting. And when we would dig in with people, there wasn't any new insights we were getting. And so at that point, we said, oh, I think maybe we're okay. I do want to say to be really careful that humility thing again. It's so easy to say, oh, I know what people are talking about, and when you go to somebody and they say, oh, we're just frustrated about this, and it's so easy to say, oh yeah, I know what you mean, and leave it at that. But to really solve problems for people, you have to dig deeper and say, well, what is it specifically that is painful about that, And what if you did it this way? What if you tweaked it? And, what if it was more like this website over here? Would that be better or would that be worse? And you really have to dig deep, I think, in order to be able to create compelling solutions.
So how long were your meetings typically with these people?
They were about 2 hours, so it wasn't short. And Devlin was great for that because for whatever reason he doesn't struggle with socially awkward situations, and so people start looking at their watch and get a little antsy, and he I don't know if he didn't notice or just ignored it, but he would just keep going, just blaze through. So we would, the hour and a half mark, and I'm dying, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and then we get, and then 10 minutes later we get the best nugget of information that we ever could have asked for. So it was really, really good. But it was about 2 hours typically that we would spend with each of these schools.
Awesome. So how many of those schools on the product validation tour are now customers?
About half actually. So some of them took a while to get on board. And I would say we didn't really do the best job of keeping those leads warm when we were very, very early stage, which is part of the reason why there aren't more. But I'd like to think it turned out okay.
Okay. So. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about, so once you finally started building the product, both of you are obviously CS students, and I think as engineers often, you can err on the side of complexity. Mm-hmm. So how did you how did you keep focus on what the customer actually needed while you built the product?
So one of the nice benefits of that product validation tour, one of the questions that we would ask people, we would show them all the features. There was a slide we had where it was like 75 features. We'd say, this is what an LMS is. Do you agree or disagree? And they'd say, oh yeah, or oh, you missed this thing. But it was huge and it was very comprehensive. And then we would say, we want to build all of this stuff eventually, but we're a startup and we need a minimum viable product, right? So we think that these 15 things, and then all the rest of them would gray out except those 15, are a viable starting point. We think if we had just these 15 things, that you could use it today for your educational experience. Is that true or false? And they would say, oh no, we need these 2 things that you don't have marked. And we'd say, okay, well if those are important, what are things we can get rid of out of the 15? Right? So there's a sort of this discovery session that we'd have with a specific school, but then the meta discovery was finding out what are the must-haves that everybody should have, and then what are the things that maybe can slide. And you have to be really careful when you do this because it's so easy to just have scope creep and say, oh, well, we'll just make it 16 things for the next school, and we'll make it 17 things for the next school, right? But really you should be trying to pare it down as part of this PVT process so that you can have a small starting product. And then you know what comes next. And we had a roadmap that came out of that tour that lasted us 3 years. We didn't have to deviate from our development roadmap for 3 years. So it was pretty rock solid at the end of it, and I was very happy. The other point when you talk about development and making sure that you're building something that's clean and usable and easy for people, it's so easy to build what I call sympathetic software, where you notice that somebody has pain, so you just say, we're just going to fix the pain. And in the 10 years ago, that happened a ton, right? Because it was like, oh, you guys use a piece of paper, and if you put this online, it'd be so much better. And so the sympathetic software was just to say, we'll just take all this paper stuff and put it on the internet. And maybe it was slightly better, but it was not people having an intimate understanding of the problems that need to be solved and finding elegant solutions to those problems. I was at the hospital one time with my daughter, and their computers, it was a console interface, right? So they had a green screen that they were using to input all information. And I was like, holy smokes, guys. And they said, yeah, I know, we're supposed to update to this new web interface. And they showed me the web interface, and it was actually worse than the green screen because they lost all their keyboard shortcuts. They had to tab through or click everything to get at the new stuff. And so it made things worse. And it was somebody's approach, it was somebody trying to be sympathetic and say, this is ugly, I'm going to make something pretty. But it wasn't people having an intimate understanding of the problem. And that's the value you get with something like a PVT, is you are able to get more in the heads of the people that are going to be using the system. And you can try a little bit more to work with them rather than working for them and coming up with a solution to the problem.
Okay. So
Again, sorry.
So going along with that, so you're in this heritage industry, you're going against a juggernaut who has all these features. I'm sure they had every feature listed that you had for your potential clients. Mm-hmm. How did you compete with that? How did you convince clients that they only needed what you had and that it was better for them?
So one of the points I should do a lesson on how to do the PVT. But one of the things that we would do is after we would talk to a school, we'd go back in the car, we'd whip out the laptop again, and we'd say, what did we learn? What are the things that they said that we hadn't thought of before? But then we would grade the schools too. We would say, how savvy are the people we just talked to? And how good a brand name are they? Is this a big brand or is this a little brand? And then how good a fit are they for our initial product? Because that's what you have to do, is identify who are the early adopters. Eventually, you want to service everybody, but you can't do that to begin with, and so you need to identify your niche that you're going to start with, and identify who are the customers in that niche, and then you serve them, and you solve problems for them. And the expanding beyond that just kind of naturally happens, because what you'll see happen is you'll have this niche, and initially you'll say, dude, you're way out left field. We're never going to be able to help you, so don't talk to us. So you'll get all these pinpoints inside of your niche, and then you get a couple that are just outside, and they'll start to pull you, and they'll say, we're not quite in the niche, but we're close. So if you just did these couple things, it would help us out. And then you say, oh, well, that's the direction we were going, so we'll go ahead and expand that way. And so you naturally start to grow the functionality that you have. You have to do it consciously, and you have to do it very carefully, but it will just happen over time.
Okay, so let's let's talk a little bit about, so you had all these student loans. What'd you do with the money right now? How did you, I mean, you can only bootstrap on student loans for so long. How did you overcome that hurdle and start to monetize or raise funding?
So we had to raise. This was a huge project, and it took us about 2 years to get to the point where we had code that people could pilot. So we had to raise. That initial money got us through the PMET, got us to the point where we could go to investors. That all happened in the summer of 2008, and then that fall we could go to investors with our book of notes that we had taken. So when we would do these visits, Devin would do most of the talking, and I would take notes, and I was transcribing exactly what people said. So we had these huge troves of notes and information. And we could take that to investors and we could say, look, we know LMS better than anybody else. So we're going to go take this over. Do you want to be a part of it? And they all said, well, it's 2008. Nobody's getting any money. Sorry. But in one of those visits, actually Josh Coates, he was a little bit involved. So Josh taught the class, and then we kind of went our separate ways and did our startup thing. And then we'd come back and show him what we'd done, and he'd give us some advice. And he introduced us to some potential investors. And at one of those visits, he just got so mad. He was like, you gotta be kidding me. Why aren't you investing in these guys? Like, this is the best idea I've seen in years. And the guy said, well, if it's such a good idea, why haven't you put any money in? And he said, oh, well, I'm going to. And so then he invested in us and gave us that initial round of seed money that we could hire a couple developers and start the process. But that was where the initial money came from. So we bootstrapped through the validation process. Once we started development, we needed a real team, and we needed enough money to be able to start growing. So then it was about a year later that we got our first round of funding from Epic. It was $1 million, and then we just kept going from there.
So I think it's interesting. At the beginning of the story, you said that among students, you all felt you could build a product to take the place of Blackboarding the weekend. Whereas once you started tackling it, it was a 2-year project.
Yeah.
So how often do you think this happens for entrepreneurs, and how do we keep ourselves from falling into that trap of thinking the solution is so simple?
You have to talk to people. I mean, again, at the end of the day, you have to talk deeply enough with people that are in the space that you can surface those additional requirements. Because nobody's going to tell them to you. Nobody comes to you and says, guess what? You don't actually know what you're talking about. There's 15 things here that you've never thought of. And even when you go show people your PVT, they don't say, oh, you know what you didn't think of is this, 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 and this. Because you ask them and you say, you know, what's the stuff? And maybe they'll give you one idea that you hadn't thought of before. See, I'm looking at you guys now because I think you're cool. But the real depth comes from digging in and just asking a ton of questions and trying to surface what are those problems. And we had to do a lot of discovery as we were talking to these schools. It wasn't stuff that just came out naturally, the needs and the requirements.
So do you feel that your product validation tour was long enough? Do you wish you had talked to more customers?
No, I'm super happy. Like I said, the only reason we stopped was because we felt we converged. And as we started development, and as when we got to the point where we had a pilot that people would start using, it was exactly right. And people, as our initial pilot started using it, the problems were never deficiencies of functionality. You know, it was, oh, I can't wait till you guys get this feature and you get this thing added. The problems were, you wrote a bug and we need to fix it, or there was a performance issue. But it was exactly the right story on the development side, and things just, they went as smoothly as we could have expected.
Okay, so you've built this awesome product. Obviously, you're no longer the CEO. You don't run the company. Neither does Devin. Talk through us that transition of running and building a product and then handing it over to somebody else to kind of take the reins. How does that feel? How do you decide when that should happen, and how do you decide who that should go to?
Sure. So when we did it, when we brought Josh in as the CEO, me and Devin had a long discussion about it because we had actually hired an interim CEO before then, and he works in Salt Lake now on another edu startup. But you know, when the opportunity was there for Josh to come in as CEO, we said, you know, it was going to be very different because we knew that it was going to. Josh is a huge personality. If you've ever met him before, he's a huge personality, and so it's going to be this. We talked about it. We said this is going to be in a lot of ways the Josh show from this point on. Are we okay with that? You know, are we okay with taking second fiddle? And we said that's what the company needs in order to be successful. We said there's an opportunity for huge growth here, and neither of us were capable of doing it on our own, and neither of us were super passionate about it. That was the bigger thing to me. You know, what I loved was building products. You can probably get a feel for that just as I talk, but I love finding elegant solutions to complex problems because I think they're there. I think when you dig in, you can find this magical solution that just works for everybody, makes everyone happy, and is actually cleaner and easier than what was there before. And that's where I wanted to focus my energy. And we kept getting distracted, as when you talk about the CEO, the executive position side of a company, that there's just distractions and things come up, and you have to worry about payroll, and you have to worry about all these other things, and I just didn't want to deal with any of it. I wanted to build the awesome product that we started out with. So I didn't have too hard of a time giving that up. It was more the concern of, do we think that this is going to keep going the direction that we started it? Has a trajectory? Are we going to stay on that trajectory, or is a new CEO going to derail us? And we talked a lot about that, and we decided that it was worth the risk, and it wasn't going to be too huge a risk, because as we talked to Josh, we got comfortable with what he would be able to do and the skill set he would bring, and there was still going to be plenty of opportunity there's still going to be plenty of need for the product innovation to come from other places. Mm-hmm. So, in a nutshell.
Okay. So how did you know Josh was the right person? I mean, how do you make that decision? How do you go about shopping for a CEO? I mean, how do you find somebody to run your company?
Yeah, so we were very, very lucky, in my opinion, in that we worked with Josh. He'd been involved as an advisor. Once he gave us, some initial seed money, he said, well, we're going to have board meetings now, and I'm going to come once a month and sit here, and you're going to show me a PowerPoint deck. And so, we'd interacted with him and had feedback and iterated on stuff with him. So we knew what we were getting into, so that helped a ton. If we were looking for a CEO who's just brand new, somebody that we had really no idea, that would be really scary. And I don't know how we would have done it right, quite frankly. Anytime you're bringing in a new position like that, there's a lot of nervousness, and it's so much easier if it can come from somebody you already know, or from someone who can introduce you to somebody that they already know. It just makes things so much easier. Sometimes it's not an option, but we got really lucky, in my opinion, there.
Okay, so let's talk about the rest of the executive team. Are those people you know? Did you have to reach outside your network for that, or how did you go about that?
Yeah, so I had no network, quite frankly. It's a bad way to do it. But I just did. Devlin had some contacts that he knew that we used very early on. But I actually hadn't planned on full on doing a startup coming out of college. I was going to get a job, right, and go work for somebody, and then eventually do my startup thing maybe. So I probably would have been sitting here thinking, oh, I'm totally going to do this 3 years from now. But I wasn't planning on it. And then this idea kind of fell in our lap, and as we looked at it and saw just the passionate need and how much angst there was and how nobody was doing anything about it, it just felt right. It felt like there's a real opportunity here, and we should be able to run with this, and so we did. So I didn't have a great network coming into it. So a lot of our executive team is actually people that I had never met before. And we have a little bit of an irreverent interview process and a structure, especially around execs. We try to get people outside of their comfort zone and see what happens. And sometimes it's very entertaining, and sometimes it gets a little awkward. But it's helped us a lot to be able to find people that are cool under pressure and fit the culture of the company, which is the biggest thing. When you hire somebody at that level that doesn't fit the culture, they can really make weird things happen. And you don't expect it, and you're like, oh, we'll be fine. But they can really make weird things happen, and so you have to be really careful. But it was all brand new people.
How do you create those situations? Okay, are we allowed to know what's your secret to interviewing?
We would just ask really awkward questions. One of the things that we would do is, we don't do it anymore, but we used to. We would make them do a presentation, which was, we said you need to present on what not to do in your potential position. So like VP of marketing, what not to do as a VP of marketing. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of amazing how many people failed at that presentation. It was nice because it was a new presentation, so it wasn't like, oh, they're just doing this CAM thing they've done 5 times before, right? Nobody's done this before. And yet so many people would come in, and instead of doing what not to do, they'd say what to do. And we're like, did you not hear what we said? Like, it was kind of funny when that would happen. And they'd say, well, here's some really good things you could do as a VP of marketing. And we're like, no, that's not what we asked for. But the people that did, it was a new presentation. It was very raw, and we would just dig in. I hate to say we just heckle them to death, right? But we would butt in and we'd interrupt them and try to throw them off, and try to see what they did. and we were always looking for good experiences and good anecdotes, and the people that could handle it well, we knew would be able to fit in our executive culture, which was actually a little bit confrontational, honestly. So that was part of why we did it that way.
Was it hard to convince them to take the job after that?
Well, one time, yeah. But usually they got it, right? And they're like, hey, you know, because it's not like we were being mean. It was just awkward, but people can get over that, so.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about the product a little bit. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a version that's open source for universities to try. So how did you make that decision to give away what you built for free, and what made you think that was a good idea?
So Devlin and I wanted to from the beginning. We said this is right, you know, like morally right, to make this thing free. And we thought that it wouldn't screw our business model. And as we started talking to potential investors, they all told us that was a horrible idea. They said there's no way that will work because everybody will just use the open source product. You won't be able to make any money. So we're not going to invest in you if you do that. So we actually backed off. We said, okay, fine. It's just a SaaS play. You know, it's just a subscription model, and that's what we'll go with. We tried to sell it, and you know, we got through our pilots really great. And as we started reaching out to schools, those are very early adopters. You know, they worked with us, and the feedback that we kept getting was, what you've shown us is awesome and amazing, but we think that you're probably just going to get bought by Blackboard 6 months from now. So if we go with you, we're just going to have to switch back anyway. So why would we do that? And Blackboard had a reputation for acquiring small competitors or suing them. So it made it a little bit awkward. And we didn't have a good answer for it. We said, you know, we promise we're not going to sell it to Blackboard. And they said, yeah, that's what everybody else said right before they sold out to Blackboard. So at that point, as we looked and said, what's a good answer for this problem, open source came up again. And it was the perfect answer, because then we could say, regardless of what happens with our company, you'll be able to run this product, you'll be able to own it, and be able to have that freedom. So it works really well in the education space. I can't say that it magically works everywhere, but I can say that a lot of the apprehension that people have around open sourcing their code is unfounded, because it's actually kind of hard to run a Canvas server, and you know, we don't make it, it's not like we make it really hard, but we don't make it super easy for people. And at the end of the day, people want to pay somebody to be able to yell at them, right? So when something goes down, they can call somebody and say, you need to fix this right now, rather than having to do it themselves. And so, especially in the enterprise space, right? If you have an enterprise product, that's just kind of a no-brainer. So it worked out really great for us. We get to have that, you know, moral, yeah, we're open source. And the business people are okay with it too. So.
Awesome. Okay, so I have to ask. So in January 2011, kind of had the public launch, and with that, there was this video release, kind of where you pretty much said Blackboard were coming for you, complete with flamethrowers. It was a nod to Apple's 1984 commercial. It was super cool.
It was awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. But knowing Blackboard was too happy, what made you think that was okay?
Well, Blackboard had gotten in hot water, and they had made this pledge. They had made a legally binding pledge that they would not sue open source companies. And so we said, well, we're open source, so you know, we should be good. And it was a little shaky there, because you know, they could have, you know, squinted at some of the language and sued us anyway. But at the end of the day, we said, you know, these guys are a big player. We are a teeny tiny player. They're not going to be able to react to us, and they're not even going to recognize us for a while, which is honestly what happens in general. You know, you look at the disruption that happens in any space, and the big boy, they know that they're slow and that people aren't big fans of them, and yet even still, it's hard for them to react and to pivot. And so we said, we're just going to go for it. We're going to grow as fast as we can, and by the time they notice, there'll be no stopping us. And actually, right after that, so they were publicly traded at the time, and on their earnings call, somebody asked about us. So on the Blackboard earnings call, they said, what about like this startup in structure? And it was funny, because the guy that answered on the call, he like refused to say our name. He said, well, that company that you mentioned, which is, I don't know why he did that, but he said, you know, these show up all the time, and you know, they come and go. It's probably just a flash in the pan. You know, it won't be an issue. And that's the typical attitude that people will have for very early stage startups. So,
awesome. So I have a couple more questions for you. If you guys have questions, we'll get to you. With me, just finish with Brian. So where are you going now? Where do you see Instructure going next? What's your plan? What are you hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, so the company's doing really, really, really well. So we have over 300 employees. We have over 600 institutions in higher ed and K-12 that use Canvas as this is a mission critical piece of their infrastructure. It's not like some cute app that a couple of teachers use. This is what they use to track teaching and learning, which is their core competency. So we have great penetration, and we're growing still very quickly. And that's all really exciting, and we're really happy with what's happening. We want to keep the story growing and expanding. When I look at the EdTech space, because it was dominated by a couple large players for so long, that were just fat and happy and just resting on their laurels, there hasn't been a lot of innovation, and there hasn't been a lot of interoperability, honestly. That's something that's come up in the last 5-7 years. And so I keep pushing for this idea of more of an ecosystem. Where things can interoperate and interplay, and everybody says you're crazy because you're going to make it easier for the new guy to come in and disrupt you. And I said that's what needs to happen. And if we can't keep up, then I guess that's our bad. But having a healthy market where people can come in and change things for the better. That's what I want to make happen, and that's I guess what I'm really excited to keep pushing. In addition to that, there's some great opportunities that we have as a company to start to stretch beyond LMS and look at what other opportunities are out there, or what are things that we can do to. It's either out or it's down, right? So what are deeper functionality that we can support inside of the learning experience, and we experiment with stuff all the time. We just introduced a new style of gradebook. It's called the Mastery Gradebook that is specifically focused on K-12 and some of the new learning approaches that happen there. So it's not about grades so much as whether you know the material, which is better for everybody. So it's fun to be able to have the bandwidth to try some of that stuff out, where before, in the early days, it was like everybody says we need a chat tool and we don't have a chat tool, so we need to get a chat tool already. So let's build a freaking chat tool. But now we have the flexibility to be able to start to experiment because we have more bandwidth. So it's fun, lots of tinkering.
So as you continue to grow, how do you keep your finger on the pulse of the customers? Do you continue to go out and validate new products and ideas that you have?
Yeah, so we still follow that same model. Whenever we come out with a new medium to large feature or piece of functionality, we do a PBT for it. And so we put together a PowerPoint deck, and we go talk to at least 10 schools, and we show them what we're thinking, and we ask them, what do you wish you had in this vein? What do you wish was different? And it's a little bit different of a story now because Canvas is part of the questions, where before it was Greenfield and it was like, we're going to build something new. It was, well, we have Canvas, are there things you wish Canvas did differently, or is this outside of Canvas? And so the discussion is slightly different, but we still follow that same model. And it has helped so much, honestly. We've identified, as we've come out with new things like our messaging tool and our analytics tool and our initial K-12 offering, we've identified things that needed to happen and the order in which they needed to be implemented. We talked about that roadmap before. That roadmap idea still applies very much in just the feature law that happens.
So this is for any feature you build, and before you build it, you get it validated by customers.
Not the teeny ones. For the teeny ones, we'll talk to some people we know, we'll talk to some people internally. But if it's medium to large, then we definitely do a PBT.
Awesome. You guys give it up for Brian.